Hey guys, it's your favorite sisters with the Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver podcast. On the show, you'll hear caregivers confessing the good, the bad, and the completely unexpected. You're guaranteed to relate, be inspired, leave with helpful tips and resources, and of course, laugh. Now, let's jump right in to today's guest confession. I like that you're looking off to the side.
I know. I want it to look like, I don't know, debonair or mysterious.
You know, we look good today compared to some days that we get on here.
I know. I put on makeup.
I did too, and I did my hair and everything.
I thought you were going to say you brushed your teeth. I was like,
I did brush my teeth, dude. But you know, we're not here to talk about our activities of daily living, although that is something, a common topic amongst caregivers.
Also, beauty regimen, because
that's true. If younger sister Emily was here, she would tell us that we both need more moisturizer.
She would.
And then she would say, "Where's the avocado?"
Yeah.
Because she is all about a good, solid avocado facial. But
if you're a caregiver, just get some avocados.
Avocado, like use the extra. Like whatever you don't eat, keep scraping.
Yeah, just spread it on your face.
Scraping.
There is your caregiver tip for the day.
That's
what? Great.
Done. Oh wait, we should have an episode, and we should talk to Maureen.
Yeah. Today's the day. Let's talk to Maureen.
You know, and Maureen was on the podcast and with the Heroes Caring for Heroes series.
She was here with the Veterans Administration.
Yeah.
In that capacity.
Yeah, but today she's not here in that capacity. The views and we're going to give you this disclaimer. Maureen's with us to talk about her personal caregiving experience.
Right.
And the views that she expresses today are hers and hers alone and does not represent the VA. So we'll go ahead and put that out for everybody. And Maureen is definitely ready to share. And I am excited about it.
She's fantastic.
Jay, will you tell all of our listeners and viewers, because we are also on YouTube,
yes.
Will you share with them about Maureen?
Oh, she's fantastic. So I love that first of all, I loved her bio. She sends in her caregiving story.
Yeah.
She just throws it out there. I am the third of 11 children. So your family it's got to have been like loads of fun. Maureen, though, she served in the U.S. Army as a counterintelligence agent. I love that.
I think that sounds very mysterious.
I know, she's
like
super cool.
We watched The Diplomat and all those those shows. I remember 24.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
I think
as,
Maureen,
like Kiefer Sutherland.
She hides from her kids, obviously. 11 years she spent as a stay-at-home mom, and she's the spouse of a 21-year U.S. Army veteran. But this is how her story starts. Mm-hmm. Which sounds similar to yours. I never planned on having kids. I planned to be this super cool auntie who gave expensive gifts. She now has 3 kids. So,
and I still have 2 dogs.
Yeah, I know. Maureen, you did not follow plan.
That's okay.
It's okay. But all those children have autism, which is they're on the spectrum rather. And today, Maureen is here to talk about difficult things, which a lot of people are hesitant to share now, and we know that, about isolation, about loss of purpose, about blame, about fatigue, about relationships, and about a lot of patience. And so much more is what I say. Maureen, we are so happy to have you here with us today because she's an open book.
She is an open book, and I can't wait to talk about everything.
So she third of 11 children.
Yeah.
So what I just will start there. Always big on family. Say it, Adley. What do you say?
So we're going to start. So give us the backstory about your family. So you were born, I love when you said 11, I was like, I'm sorry, what? But then I remembered you're from Washington State, and I'm like, that's not too far from some of the states that have tons of kids.
Yeah.
And so birth order is going to be important. So just, tell us about life growing up and then how you made your way, like work your way up to really that caregiving story.
Sure. So I always joke that our family is a little bit more of a family forest than a family tree because I have 3 biological siblings and then 6 adopted siblings and then 2 step siblings. So technically there's 13 of us total. But I usually say the mom and the stepdad that I lived with, they had 11 total. And so being number 3 meant that I did a lot of babysitting growing up. And classic middle child, I love attention and had to fight for it.
Oh, I love you. I knew we were besties for a reason. So you were caregiving at a young age. And this is normal though, if you really think about it, especially, older children who have younger siblings or a brood of people, or when you think in rural communities where family lives close to each other, everybody's allowed to redirect everybody based on age. Honestly,
Yeah.
like you don't really see a lot of younger people redirecting the older, but you see a lot of older JJ redirecting the younger.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And I think, during the time that I lived with my mom, we probably had 25 to 30 foster kids come through. And my
Thank
mom
you.
adopted 5 of the foster kids that we had come through. So,
Wow. I love that. I work in the foster care. I work with foster children for the last 25 years. And so I have to say, I will always say thank you to your parents, who were willing to take in, children of their own, but now they're yours. Now they're your siblings. I love that.
yes, yes. And growing up in such a big family, and then growing up in a religion where, really it was your job as a woman is to get married and have kids, and that's
Mhm.
what your value lied in. I just didn't want that for me.
Mhm.
And I didn't know how to verbalize that, and I didn't know how to sit with the fact that I didn't want that, and I didn't know how to escape that. And it wasn't like a cult or anything like that. That was just kind of the norm.
Yeah.
And then I ended up coming to DC from Washington State, which is where I'm from, and visited the Vietnam War Memorial.
Was this a field
And
trip?
it was a flight. I flew there.
Oh, I didn't know if this was how old you are when you went
Oh,
to
I'm sorry.
DC.
I was probably 18, 19 years old. It was my
Okay.
first year of college, and I actually won the trip based off of an essay on diversity. Even back then, I was a bit of a social justice warrior.
I
And
love that.
so I walked into a recruiting station and I said, I'm ready to sign up. And they all just stared at me. And then I was like, I'm ready to sign up. And they laughed. And so I was like, well, I guess I'll go next door. And I started to walk out. And then they were like, oh, whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah, you're like, I'll find another branch, people.
Yeah.
Okay, that's actually hilarious. Okay, keep going.
So I, was talking to the recruiter, and I told them that this is specifically what I wanted to do. And the reason I was joining the Army was because at the time, most of the other branches, the Marines, the Air Force, the Navy, would only give you a branch, like a field.
Okay.
So you could be in airplane stuff, or you could be in intelligence stuff. But you could be cutting grass outside of an intelligence unit. There's no guarantee of what your job would be. But in the Army, you could get a specific job.
Ooh.
So I was able to sign up to be a counterintelligence agent.
Ooh. I like that. The Army's sitting here like, we love Maureen. She is doing shameless marketing for us. All the other branches like, we changed. We didn't.
Yeah,
So
they
how
have.
old were you when you marched in there and said, I want to?
I like how you said marched in there.
Yeah, you marched in there and said, I'm enlisting, and they disregarded you for a second. But how old were you at that time?
I think at that time I was 23.
Okay.
Oh, so you
I was a
waited a
little
minute.
older.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
I really had tried all these other jobs. I had actually a pretty successful as a vocal coach, a voice teacher, and I was doing pretty good.
Yeah.
But I just really felt compelled to serve. And so I walked in 10 days later. I was on an airplane to basic training. I'm not from a huge military family. Like a lot of them are legacy families. My grandparents all served, but many of them didn't choose to. They were drafted or whatever.
Right.
And no one in my parents' generation that I'm aware of served. So I wasn't brought up in a military lifestyle. So it was a total culture shock for me.
Interesting.
And so, and I loved serving in the military. And I thought I was going to be this really awesome, cool lady soldier who was going to do like these really cool James Bond things.
I love that you immediately went there. I love that you did that because that would be me as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I visioned the like evening gown and the beautiful woman who was getting intelligence from, some dignitary in another country.
We are so aligned, Maureen.
Oh,
this is fantastic.
Keep going, Maureen. Natalie's distracted. She's so excited. James Bond and filming games.
But here's the thing. Remember when I graduated college, I'd talked about possibly, I was going into law enforcement, but I love the idea of going into kind of intelligence kind of thing.
And I had thought about going into the military, and then mom told me that if I went as an officer and I fraternized with the soldiers, that I would get kicked out. And so I thought probably shouldn't do that because I really do love people in uniform.
Okay, Maureen, moving on.
Anyway, well, I'm just
Apparently,
saying.
I do too.
Thank you.
One.
So you found one in the Marines in the Army. So you get in the Army and you start working and you meet your husband?
Nope, I hadn't even started my job yet. So I went in the Army. I was never getting married, never having kids, and I was fervent on that. And then I went to my job training school, which in the military, in the Army, they call AIT.
Mm-hmm.
And we were at this event where everyone was arguing, and I was really frustrated because no one was listening to each other. And it was, as soon as we finished what we did, it was a 3-day weekend. And I was like, you're wasting our time. I could be out doing what I want. And this voice came on and just said 2 sentences. And everyone all of a sudden like started working together, and they were out of there in 15 minutes. And I was intrigued at someone who could, I don't want to say manipulate, but handle a room like that.
Yeah.
And so I found out who he was. And honestly, at the time, he didn't have any hair. He was he had shaved his head. He was kind of bald. And I was like, oh, he's not that cute. But I was so attracted to his spirit.
Yeah.
I kind of went after him. And I've never been one to chase a guy before, but I really was fascinated.
This is great. I love that you
didn't want anything to do with me at all. No.
Okay.
Because I was trouble.
Did you say you were trouble?
Yes.
And why did he think you were trouble? This is much more fun.
So I was the private who chewed out her new company commander because the drill sergeants all had different standards, and I was angry.
Alienated even then.
You know what? I think she was meant to be in charge.
I do.
That's what I'm going to tell you. Okay. So you finally, is he older, same age?
He's about 6 months younger than me.
So he's a pup. I like that. You're a cougar, but you're cougarette.
I'm a junior cougar.
Right. So you guys, so he finally came over to the way you were thinking, and then what happened?
So we got married. Well, actually, it was funny because we went to our drill sergeant and we were like, we really like each other. We'd like to keep dating. Can you get us stationed together?
Okay.
So he worked really hard to get us both stationed in Germany. And then we were like, let's just get married. And so like 3 weeks later, we got married. And my drill sergeant was like, I went to all that work, got married. And AIT marriages have a very, very high divorce rate. It's like 90% or higher.
Okay.
And so if I had $1 for every person that told us it wouldn't work or we wouldn't last, I could probably retire.
Oh, nice.
Wasn't a lot of support for our marriage.
Yeah.
And we had an actual like wedding. Like a lot of people would run up to Vegas. We were in Arizona. They'd run up to Vegas, get married, and come back. We had a wedding at AIT. So I'm in my wedding dress and the drill sergeant threatens to drop me in it. And I'm like, I am not going to do that in this, $1,000 gown. Sorry.
I like that.
Yeah. So then we moved to Germany and I started doing counterintelligence work and loved it. And it was right after 9/11 had happened. So it was actually counterterrorism too. And I was really, really jiving it. I was actually a private doing it all by myself because they deployed my sergeant. And so here I am in a foreign country where all these terrorist cells are and doing this work that I really loved. And then I got the flu and I went to the doctor and I was pregnant.
Wow.
And I cried a lot. I was in shock and then I cried because it was not in my plan. And I went home and told my husband, but by that time I had kind of accepted like this is happening. We can do this with one kid.
Yeah.
And we did. We both got promoted to specialists, and we'd switched at that point because I had chased down an armed suspect while I was pregnant. They put me on desk duty, and so they put him in the field.
But that's actually funny. You chased down a suspect while you were pregnant. They're like, that could be a workman's comp.
Yeah. Slow down, Maureen.
Slow down, Maureen. Okay. And then, and then what happened?
So then I hurt my back. I'd heard it in job training school, but it got worse and worse and worse.
Huh.
And so I went in to get an x-ray to see, what was going on. And they were like, well, we can't x-ray you today. And I thought, gosh, is the machine broken again? Because, military medical care wasn't what it is today.
Right.
And they were like, well, no, we can't x-ray anyone who's pregnant. And I was like, well, who's pregnant? My son is only 6 months old, so there's no way that I'm going to be pregnant. And I was so mad. They actually brought the chaplain because they thought I was going to hurt my husband.
Oh,
Really bad. And so I had my daughter while I was in the service, and then eventually got promoted to sergeant, and we moved to Monterey, California to learn Korean, both of us.
Yeah.
And it was there that we realized like 2 babies and 2 soldiers is just too hard.
Yeah.
And I had gotten hurt and it had continued to get worse. So I decided at that point to get out of the military. And um, the my husband offered to get out, which I really respect and admire that he did. But we knew that since I was hurt, I'd get disability pay, which was the only way that we could afford it. So there I was, a stay-at-home mom with 2 kids.
wow.
Lost everything that I'd waited so long for. And I love my kids and I loved them, but it was so hard.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take a break right now.
Yeah.
Because this is a good pause point.
Yeah.
Because I love this first part.
I know. And now
And
there's some changes.
And now we're at this place where she's a stay-at-home mom with 2 kids, which was the opposite of what she had originally wanted.
Yeah.
So we're about to find out what happened next because it gets better.
Yeah.
We'll be right back.
All right, everybody, we are back here with Maureen. Okay, if you missed that first 15 minutes, you need to
rewind.
You need to rewind.
Rewind.
Okay, so we got 2 kids. She has stepped out of military life. She has left that because she's going to take care of these 2 kids.
She's on disability.
She's on disability because she has hurt her back.
Mm-hmm.
But Maureen, something triggers. You are at home and your life has completely changed, but there has been something going on that you think, maybe it's because you and your husband are away from the kids so much. Tell us how that starts, because there's a lot of caregiving that begins that's different than just being a parent.
Yeah.
Sure. So, right at the time that I became a stay-at-home mom, the Army sent my husband overseas for 22 months.
Of course.
Of course, I'm alone.
Judge and I are like, of course.
Yeah. I think every military spouse or people who know us can.
As they're all nodding like, yes.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. And so, we had noticed our kids were not very well behaved.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought, well, that's probably because we worked very long hours. It was 14 to 16-hour days, a lot. And I even got, I moved home while he was gone to be near my family and, sat in the back row of my church and was just devastated that this was where I was, even though it was the exact opposite of what I'd wanted. And even got asked to leave the church because my kids were not behaving well.
Mm.
And so there was another mother there who had a little boy who was on the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, autism, kind of had a stereotype at the time.
Yes.
It was kind of those kids that there was often a lot of moaning, and they were very hard to, they tended to be running and misbehaving, but not in the way that my kids were very, very social. And so it didn't even occur to me to think that they were tested. I just thought they were poorly behaved because we hadn't been home to parent them a lot. And this mom came up to me and said, have you ever thought that maybe your children have autism? And I was like, well, no, they're social, they're verbal, they're just active.
Yeah.
And so they had a child find program in Washington State where you could get your kids tested for free.
Yep.
And we didn't have much money because I was a stay-at-home. My husband was only a sergeant. And so I went in to get my son tested, who was a little bit older, because he was much more withdrawn. And he would we had a little house, it was like 1,300 square feet. He would line his Matchbox cars up by size, shape, and color all around the house. And I thought that was how kids normally played with toys.
Oh.
He did with balls.
I'm like, oh, I see that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. So, and autism wasn't the household word that it is nowadays. And so, while he was being tested, my other daughter, my younger daughter, was just all over the place. And they were like, why don't we test her too? So they tested both of them and turned out that they both fell on the spectrum. And, what that first moment of diagnosis was both a relief.
Yeah.
Because maybe it wasn't me being an awful parent, but it was also grief because I knew that my life and their life was going to be a lot harder
Mm-hmm.
for the rest of their lives. And I think it's hard sometimes for us as parents of special needs kids to admit that this isn't what we would have wanted for them if we could help it, and we know that I believe that God makes people the way they're supposed to be, but
Hmm.
it's going to be hard.
That's right.
And we didn't have the services back then that we have nowadays, because this was about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I think you can tell I'm someone who loves to dig in and learn stuff. And so I just threw myself into learning about autism and how to parent these two special children. And um, the parenting styles that they taught back then didn't quite work with the children that I had, but I learned, like, the cool thing is, at the time our library had free parenting classes, and they taught different styles. So there was like oh gosh, I can't even remember the name, like The Incredible Years and Love and Logic.
I was
And
getting
like
ready to say Love and Logic. Love and Logic
yeah,
is
yeah.
evidence-based program that a lot of and is still used extensively.
Yes. So, and I came from a hitting household, right? My mom spanked us. My dad spanked us. That was how you disciplined children. That doesn't work with children on the spectrum. And
No.
I've never hit my kids. I don't believe in hitting, but it's definitely, the research has shown that hitting is not the right way to discipline a child on the
No.
spectrum. And so I had to really relearn how to parent. I had to learn everything that I could about autism, and really made that my quote unquote career, just caring for these kids and taking them into public. And a lot of it was just teaching the public, because Gabby, my middle, had such high sensory needs that we'd go to Walmart and she'd throw up because it just smelled so bad and it was so bright and so loud. She just couldn't handle it.
Wow.
And people would be like, why are you bringing your kids in public when they're sick? And it's like, they're not sick, and a lot of times children on the spectrum have a hard time potty training. And so my son would have an accident in the store and people would be like, how could you let this happen? What a bad mom you are. You should spank your kids. And I was just like, this is really hard.
Yeah.
No kidding.
I want to jump back for just a second. I want to go
Yeah.
back to that diagnosis day, because I hear you saying you want more for the kids, you got grief. What's that conversation like with your husband?
Yeah.
Because he's away. Are you a little like, are you angry? Are you like, you need to come back? Or what are your feelings like there? Because you're married and
But
he's got,
you're
you're
doing
50-50 there.
No, there's no 50-50.
Yeah.
If he's gone for 22 months.
Well, no, but it's 50-50. He was part of that kid process too.
You mean like the whole part thing?
Yeah. He
Like
was
the
birds and
donor.
bees, he was part of that. So
Yeah, that's true.
yeah.
Yeah. We haven't really talked a lot about that. I don't know that I can share his perspective, but with mine, I didn't know that he really understood or believed it at first. I know that, my parents and his parents struggled with it too. One of them, and I can't remember which set of parents it was, said that I was doing this because I needed attention while my husband was gone, that the kids were fine. And I was just, this is my cry for help. And that really struck me down a little, uh, that I would fake a diagnosis to get attention for my kids.
Almost like
And
narcissism.
so a lot of it was educating the older generation parents of how to grandparent these children, and it was, they come from hitting. You can't hit my kids. It was, you have to explain what's going on. You have to be really patient. My daughter screamed a lot. We didn't know for a long time that she was hard of hearing. Her ears had clogged with wax, but we didn't have the language to fix it. So she screamed to communicate. And my stepdad would walk around with his ears plugged, or he'd just leave and go upstairs whenever I came over with my kids, which he was doing it for his own mental health, but man, did it hurt, and a lot of people that I would have loved to have made friends with just couldn't handle the challenges that my kids came with. And so it was hard to find people that would be around me and my kids, because they were hard. And I was tired, I was pretty burned out. Caring for them all the time it's a lot of work, and we called it playtime, but I would always try to find activities that would meet their sensory needs and gaps. But that was fun. But it was, you can't just sit down and talk over a glass of wine with a friend. That's not going to happen. You're going to be interrupted a gazillion times. And so a lot of people just didn't have the patience for that.
And the thing is that's so interesting is that you were living in Washington State at the time, which is a very progressive, from a mental health standpoint, um, a lot of best practice in mental health and behavioral health comes out of Washington, California, Colorado, New York. That you see these states that are very progressive. And even then, just because your state is progressive doesn't mean that the people who around you understand it. Because you're exactly right. It took for a long time. It took a long time to get spectrum services like ABA services, for example, covered by health insurance. And because a lot of people are just, these are willful children. And, but the number, autism is the fastest growing, in case you didn't know, fastest growing designation for of all the special education diagnoses on the IEPs, fastest growing in the United States.
Wow.
And so they're identifying kids, but that's now. Like you're saying 20 years ago. And so I think about like how you're having to engage in school with ensuring that they're there. And as a parent, I keep hearing you say, because so many parents don't see themselves, or people would say, well, you're a parent, you're not a caregiver. But when you have a special needs child with differing abilities or multiple abilities that may not be the social norm of abilities, it's hard for people to understand.
It is.
And I would think that would be very lonely. That's what I hear you saying. Like, it was hard and nobody wanted to be friends or hang out with me because my kids had needs that they didn't want to necessarily or could tolerate and accommodate.
Yeah. I have the blessing of having one friend who could, and she had two girls. And at the time I was teaching voice lessons to supplement our income, and she could tolerate it. And so she really was a savior to me at the time, because I just needed a friend. I needed someone to help kind of normalize what I was going through and validate how I was feeling. And she had two wonderful daughters. Her name was Lori, and her daughters were Brittany and Christy. And they brought a lot of joy, love, and life into our home. But it was mostly, on days that they had voice lessons. So I would teach both the girls. And then sometimes we'd even go out to eat together, and she wouldn't be upset when the kids would knock over their drinks, or if one had to just walk around the table while we ate, and that really helped a lot. And then actually I ended up asking my brother-in-law to come stay with me. He just graduated high school, didn't want to go to college, and was kind of at that age where you clash with your parents. And so I was like, come live with me. And so he was this gentle giant. He's kind of a bigger, football type stature guy. And he just brought a peace with him that was so helpful, and was that shoulder I could cry on when things were hard. And he's a very warm, like physically warm person. And so my daughter would curl up like a kitten behind his back on the couch or a chair and just sleep. And she never slept. So it was like, oh my God, she's sleeping. I'm gonna go take a nap.
Isn't it interesting that sometimes it just takes one, or it takes two person to really change the situation, Maureen? So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, because your husband, there's 22 months there. He comes back. Something occurs when he comes back, which really doesn't surprise me. But why don't you go ahead and jump into that?
All right. Well, let me tell you, when he first came back, he struggled a bit with how regimented our lives were.
Yeah.
We had picture schedules and everything went right according to plan. And I had all these visual aids. And he was like, what the heck is all of this? This is way too regimented. I live in the military. I don't want this in my home.
Wow.
And we're moving cross country because, of course, he got home and it's time to move. And so the kids are already kind of unsettled because their stuff has changed.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, fine. Take it all away for 3 days. They're yours. I'm just going to be here.
Ooh.
After about a day and a half, he was like, put it back, fix it, fix it, fix it.
And down deep on the inside, that feels good.
Yeah.
That feels good.
She's laughing.
Yeah. So he got on board and started educating himself on what autism was and how to help the kids, and really became an advocate with me. And then we had another baby. And
have you not I don't know if you know this and how babies are born.
Yeah, Maureen, we're just saying.
I know.
I do.
Birth
We really
can fail.
Yeah.
That's my answer. Birth control can fail.
Oh.
Well, and she was planned. I actually really begged for her. In all honesty, I wanted to I think I carried a lot of guilt
Yeah.
that it was my fault that the children had autism.
Yeah.
And I wanted to try to have a neurotypical child. And since I was a stay-at-home mom, it was kind of my own case study to see if I could have a neurotypical child. And so I talked him into it, of course, because we have a third child. And when she was born, I was with her all the time, and I knew to watch for the signs of it. And so we ended up getting into a program that Chapel Hill had in North Carolina for siblings of children on the spectrum.
Hmm.
And so we took her in at 12 months to get tested, and she actually tested at 24 months. So she was really advanced for her age. And so I was like, awesome. But I knew that in 12 months we'd have to go back. And so I cheated a little and I taught her all of the different tasks that I knew that she would have to do to pass the test. And when we went back for 24 months test, I was like, we got this. And about an hour into the 3-hour test, I was like, oh my, we don't got this. And then so when they came in that afternoon to tell me that I had another child on the spectrum, that was heavy. That was my husband, of course, was in Afghanistan. So I was once again alone for the diagnosis.
Yeah.
And I remember calling my sister who had moved to North Carolina for her husband's, he was going back to school, and just sobbing on the phone with her because I knew how hard it had been for my first two. And now I knew what we were about to go through with Coraline, and I was heartbroken. And I remember having a conversation with God, like, is it me? Am I just a really bad parent? And I really felt a strong conviction that that wasn't it at all. That's just insecurity. And so I called my husband in Afghanistan to tell him, and I will tell you the line that he said, because I've always been impressed by his mind, was, well, who better than us to raise another child with autism?
Oh.
And he was so right because we already knew what to do.
Oh.
And, they're all thriving now. They are, if you meet them, they are the most loving, kind, independent kids you're going to meet. Most people wouldn't know that they had autism unless you were really looking for the signs, because we did put a lot of work into them. And uh, it was. It was a moment, though, to
Yeah.
have three children, two girls on the spectrum was a moment of acceptance. Like, okay, here we go. Buckle up, Buttercup. It's about to get really exciting.
Oh, and I'm gonna stop us right there for the break.
Yeah.
Because you said buckle up, Buttercup.
Yeah.
That is break worthy.
Yes.
So, okay, we'll be right back.
All right, everybody, we are back here with Maureen. Maureen, your story is your husband saying, who better than us to raise another child with, it put chills on my arms to raise another child with autism. So I love that, someone that's on the spectrum. So I do want to touch on, because you were part of Heroes Caring for Heroes. Your husband he was in the military for 21 years. And how old are the kids now, first of all? How old are your kids?
Sure. So I have a 21-year-old, a 20-year-old, and a 14-year-old.
Okay, first of all, that's a lot of fun.
Nugget.
So you've got a lot of transition here. You have these three kids. Of course, you have military life. Your husband has got 21 years in the military. Tell me about all this mixture, because we always talk about, and obviously he was deployed multiple times. Tell me about the mixture of the kids, we talk about seen and unseen scars in military life. You've got a lot of experience with that. Tell me about how you've got a mass of caregiving, I feel like, going on in your life. Tell me about that and how it impacts you.
Um, that's a good question. I think one of the hardest things for me transitioning from being a soldier to being a military spouse was how invisible I became suddenly.
Yeah.
I definitely felt like the baggage that came with my husband rather than something that mattered to the military. And so I tended to live off post. I tended to stay awake, because military families can be, back, it's a lot different now because most people live off post, but back then most people lived on post.
Yeah.
And, if your kids misbehaved in public, if you showed up with curlers in your hair and in your bathrobe, like it was going to get back to your husband and his commander.
Yeah.
And so I just couldn't handle all the scrutiny. So I always lived off post, which was kind of lonely. And then, there wasn't the services that they have now, like the military family life centers. They didn't have that back then.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt sometimes like, uh, a little helpless because I didn't know how to go get the services that I needed, that I knew my kids needed, and had to go find parents who weren't in the military to find pathways to the services that the kids needed. So, ABA wasn't a thing at the time for my older two. So we ended up in speech therapy, occupational therapy, and physical therapy, which between the two kids, I had 18 appointments a week.
Wow.
And it was just back and forth and back and forth. And then all of the appointments came home with homework, quote unquote homework for the kids. And so there was never downtime. I couldn't go on vacation. I couldn't take a mom vacation because there wasn't anyone who had the skills to take care of my kids. I couldn't go to work because there weren't daycare centers where the staff were trained in kids with special needs. And so it was exhausting. I definitely suffered from some caregiver fatigue. I was just tired and depressed and lonely, and I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know I was a caregiver. I was just a parent, trying to do her job. And I didn't know caregiver fatigue was a thing. I just thought that I was this bad mom because there were times I just wanted a break,
Yeah.
I needed a moment. I couldn't even go to the bathroom by myself, which many moms deal with, whether the kids are special needs or not. But it wasn't because my kids wanted to be with me. It was because I was afraid of what they might do when I wasn't in the room with them. And
Most
so
of that.
yeah. I mean, our pets now are the problem. I don't get to go to the bathroom without my little pug following me in.
But that's normal. I'm totally fine with my beagle doing that to me as well. Winston was in the bathroom with JJ this morning as she got ready.
Yeah.
And I was just like, well, at least he's not drooling.
Yeah.
And he's not getting drool on you. It's fine.
It's okay.
So let me ask you this. You have this shift though, because here's the thing that's so interesting. You are a subject matter expert for the VA, especially around benefits administration for that side of the house. You go back to work.
Mm-hmm.
You're not a stay-at-home mom.
She goes back to school.
So what was it in you? And was it, I don't know if it was when your husband left the military, at some point it feels like there was this switch that you're like, I'm going to do more. And it sounds like and it sounds like selfish, but it's not. Like, I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to get my degree. I'm going to go and I'm going to do this because you are a total bad A. Like you knew those, like when we were talking to you on the veteran, if you haven't listened to Maureen explaining the veterans benefits, holy moly, they are
inside out, upside down.
October 31st. That's the episode that you want to listen to. So tell me, what was that point that you're like, it's time for a change? Maureen's coming to the forefront.
Sure. I do want to, I've kind of painted a grim picture. I do want to say there were moments of joy with my children, and I learned how to see the world in a different way. And I was never a patient person, never.
Mm.
And I am now one of the most patient persons you're ever going to meet. And that skill came to serve me later. So I just wanted to kind of give
silver lining.
Yeah.
That's the way God put you. God was like, you're going to need some patience. Let me think.
Yeah.
How can I do this?
3 children on the spectrum that have different levels of needs.
That'll do.
Done.
Yeah, there you go, Maureen.
So actually, I didn't really want to go back to school. I was kind of stuck in my poor me mentality.
Oh.
But we moved to Maryland, and we were going to be there for 3 years while my husband was stationed there. And this new thing called the post 9/11 GI Bill had just come out, like brand new.
Yeah.
And you got paid a housing stipend while you attended school for free for veterans. And my husband was like, we could use the money.
You dang
please go
right.
back to school. Yeah.
Oh, look at
and
that.
I remember telling him, I don't need a master's to change diapers. Like, I was really resistant.
Yeah, I love that. No.
I already am a subject matter expert. I'm a SME.
Right.
Exactly.
So, but I do, I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right. We could use the money. So I go back to school to get a mental health counseling degree because I had a bachelor's in psychology. And, the first 6 weeks I was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I fit in. Everyone was so much younger, and while I had 3 kids, they were just hoping their hookup didn't result in kids. And, I'd been in the Army. They didn't even know what the Army really did. And I just felt uncomfortable. So I went into the school certifying official, which is the guy that says, yes, this is your GI Bill, and yes, you can use it. And I was like, I'm going to drop out. I can't do this. And it felt really selfish too. I felt like spending all this time on me was taking away time I could be spending with my kids. But at this time, they were all in school and they were all doing pretty good.
Yeah.
And he was like, "We'll go to the Student Veteran Resource Center." And I was like, "I'm not a veteran," because I'd never identified as a veteran. So,
Maureen.
I know.
You know,
Girl.
but this is so common. It is so common for people who served, who didn't maybe experience combat or who did not see, or there's these preconceived notions of what a veteran is. And and that's why so many of them don't access their benefits.
Look at Maureen.
Maureen was like, that's kind of me.
Kind of me. So I did go, and he helped me, for the first time with him. He was like, "Oh, I thought you were using your GI Bill, not your husband's." And I was like, "Well, I am." And he's like, "Well, doesn't that make you a veteran?" And like the light bulb finally went ding. And I was like, "Oh, maybe I am a veteran, I guess." So I go to the resource center, and all the branch flags are around the room, and the people are all in their grunt style shirts, and I'm just like, "Oh, I'm home." And what I'd been missing for so long.
Wow.
And
that shared past experience.
I know.
It probably felt very familiar, which made it
so
comfortable.
Yeah.
I was home for the first time in a very long time.
Wow.
And so I started taking advantage of some of the organizations that are out there for veterans, because I guess I am a veteran, so I can do this. And one of the life-changing ones for me was Student Veterans of America, because they taught leadership. And, I'd only been a sergeant in the Army, which isn't that high of a rank, and I'd only been it for like a couple months. And it really helped me understand that the skills that I'd learned in the military really translated into the civilian world beautifully. I just didn't have the language for some of it. You can't just knife hand a volunteer and tell them they got to do something. You have to build the relationship and help them understand the why and create the goals. And then I realized that the degree I was seeking, I hated. I did not want to do therapy. I was doing my internship at Johns Hopkins, and I was like, "I love therapy. I think it's really important, but I don't think I'm meant to do
I
this."
didn't want to do it either.
Yeah. So I started looking into ways that I could pivot, and I got selected into a program that doesn't exist anymore. I wish it still did, but it's called High Ground Veteran Advocacy, and they teach veterans how to become national advocates.
Wow.
And I was a little nervous going in because I didn't know what an advocate was.
Yeah.
And I was the only woman. The other four were all men. One of them had run for office. One of them had passed a bill. And I was like, "Can you tell me the difference between the House and the Senate?" But
I love that.
But it turns out that those 11 years teaching the community about autism translated beautifully into Capitol Hill advocacy. And so my career just took off from there.
Oh, I love it. And Jay, I know we're at the end of our time, so because we got to do sister questions. Maureen, I want to be your best friend. I want to be like, not JJ. You can't be JJ's best friend though. And so
we just won't tell her, Maureen.
Mostly that. And so I hear so much, like there's so much of Maureen's like who's similar personality to mine, because I'm like, "Oh, I want to do that, but I don't want to do that. I want this, but I don't really want to do that." And you are such an advocate. I mean, like, again, if you have not listened to the Veterans Administration, the episode to hear Maureen talk about benefits, she is so passionate about helping other veterans and families. You have a total servant heart. You are a caregiver at its basic essence.
On fire, though.
And
she's like, and I think that's what, Maureen, you are just like one in a million, though, because you make the conversations that you're able to have. I think there's so many people that when they think about benefits in any field, you just drill down and you make it easy to understand. You don't talk here and make it like, "No, you can't have it," because it's so complicated. You're just like, "Look, I want you to get it." You're like on everybody's side. But I feel like there's so much of it when you just said it. I learned this from 11 years of caregiving.
Exactly. It's that lived experience that helps.
Yeah.
Okay. So Jay, what?
I'm going to ask it.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Are you going to ask? What are you going to ask?
I'm ready.
I'm actually nervous, Maureen.
This has nothing to do with anything that Maureen has shared today.
Oh, I'm ready.
Okay, Maureen, and something you wrote in here, which has just tickled me to death. You said, because this is all about you, you said, "I am also a new Jeeper And I have
Oh,
discovered a love of off-roading. What in the heck? Is this like Maureen's self-care activity? Tell
Don't
me
be
about
asking my questions like that.
how did you get into that?
so actually, I got in a horrible car wreck last year,
Okay.
and it was a 3-car pileup on 66, which is a horrible highway
Oh,
to drive on.
66 is like Satan's playground. It's like 95.
No.
Yes. So, someone was going 55, rear-ended us at a stop, and there was one guy in the middle. I was at the front, and it wrecked my SUV. I had like a Honda Pilot, and it took forever for the parts to come in, and we needed a car. My son is 6'3", so we needed a car that would fit my son.
Right.
Yeah.
So, it was Christmas time, and we were heading up to this cabin that we have up in the woods for Christmas, and I rented a car. I'd rented an SUV, and when I got to the lot, all they had was a Jeep. And so I was like, well, it's tall, it'll work.
I'm assuming a Jeep
And
Wrangler.
it was a Jeep Wrangler. It was
So
actually
that's
Sahara.
okay.
But I had so much fun driving it that we had a little Honda Civic that was kind of on its last legs.
Yeah.
And so it was in the shop and it needed some work. And my husband, who had taken it in, saw that there was a Jeep on the lot. And they were like, hey, could we trade in the Honda towards the Jeep? And they were like, sure, because he knew that I really enjoyed the Jeep. And so he calls me and he's like, get down here. So I come down. And here's this really sexy Jeep Wrangler. I mean, Rubicon. It is lifted. It's got a soft convertible top.
Please send the photo. Please send the photo. Please send the photo to me. That's coming in the episode.
Maureen, you just step out. You just continue to surprise me. You're just like serious straight laced, but then Maureen is like, I got a lifted Jeep and I got a little blue hair. If you have not seen Maureen, she's like serious. She's in front of Congress, but she also is like blue hair.
It's what it is it is just individualism. It is you're so well spoken, well versed in all the things. And you're like, and yet this is also me too. And I'm going to and I think this comes from potentially you having children on the spectrum. I want you to accept all of me. All of me, not just part of me.
Mm-hmm.
And I love your blue hair. Here's the bigger question is, do you have ducks in the front window?
I do. I have about 30.
I knew she'd have ducks. Anybody who loves a Jeep. I had a Jeep when I was growing up, and it used more oil than it did gas.
It's true.
But it was red. It was in 1991, and I was so cool. It had 31.5-inch tires on it. And I thought I was like a bad A.
Yeah.
And really, when I say it used more oil than gas, it really did. So it was only for a summer. It was fine. Okay. So here's my last question.
Yes.
Last question.
Okay.
I feel like this is the answer. What is your favorite guilty pleasure?
Ooh, my favorite guilty pleasure.
One thing.
The one thing you do for yourself.
I think it's the cabin. We have a little log cabin next to a river that we got for a steal. And anytime I can get there, it's like a soul recharger. My battery for everything just goes to full, and I'm ready to come back and tackle whatever difficult policy issue or challenging personality or, getting multiple agencies to work together on a topic. And it feels guilty to me because I don't work when I'm at the cabin. We go out to eat. The cabin takes like 10 minutes to clean before we leave. I don't do anything but just relax. And it feels very guilty because I'm just chillaxing. And I think as a caregiver, we get into go mode.
Mm-hmm.
And as a mom and as a working mom, I don't think that's exclusive to caregivers. And so to just sit and be and hear is heaven.
I love that.
You're fantastic.
I have a couple. Let's do a lightning round.
Yes.
Because there were some questions that you wanted. And so we're going to do a lightning round, and we're going to do 120 seconds. Are you ready for a lightning round?
I'm ready.
What are some of the books you would recommend to caregivers and to others?
Ooh. So 2 of my favorite books for parents with children under the age of teenagers is The Incredible Years and The Explosive Child. I love those.
Oh, I've read that one. Okay.
I'm ready.
Go, Jay.
Parenting tricks you would recommend.
Ooh, patience. I think stop fighting battles you don't need to fight. And the other thing would be find ways to make the work fun.
I like that too. Okay. There's 4 questions. Okay. How can friends of those in caregiving roles help support?
Oh, I mean, besides being there and accepting them as they are, don't ask them to go out without their kids. Invite the kids along or whoever they're caregiving for. A lot of friends would offer to take me out to drinks, and I couldn't because I had the kids. And so make the person who they're caregiving for a part of the friendship and a part of the activities that you do. That would be one. And the other thing is educate yourself. Learn a little more about whatever diagnosis or illness that the person that's being caregived for has so that you can help support. And then don't ask, how can I help? Just offer, hey, can I pick up the kids? Could I bring you by dinner? Could I?
Yep.
Because you take the emotional work of thinking of how you can help me off the plate, and I can just be thankful.
Ooh, love that. Okay, Jay, last question.
Reaching out for help. Where did you reach out for help? What would you recommend? A place to get help?
For people on the spectrum, there are autism societies in every state. That is where I found a lot of help and support. For families in the military, use those resources that you have now. They're amazing. For families that don't have those resources and support, actually, surprisingly, Facebook has some amazing communities that you can reach out to for friendship, for support, for learning about or kind of validating what your experiences are like, because someone else is going to be writing about it too.
Validation. I love that.
Love it.
Maureen, you are amazing.
I'm so glad we're besties.
I know.
I'm so glad.
I love what you guys are doing. Thank
You are fantastic.
Guys, thanks so much for listening to this episode. And we are so grateful to have Maureen on here to share her personal story.
Yes.
Again, her story only.
Yes.
Represented, her opinions are hers alone.
Exactly.
And very much like ours. Our opinions are ours.
Absolutely. They are
ours are our opinion. And so, guys, thanks so much for listening. Until next time, until we confess again, we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Well, friends, that's a wrap on this week's confession. Thanks so much for listening in to the podcast. But before you go, please take a moment to leave us a review and tell your friends about the Confessions Show. Don't forget, visit our website to sign up for our newsletter, as well as connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Pinterest, and Twitter. You'll also find the video recording of all our episodes on the Confessions website and our YouTube channel. We'll see you next Tuesday when we come together to confess again. Till then, take care of you. Okay, let's talk disclaimers. We are not medical professionals and are not providing any medical advice. If you have medical questions, we recommend that you talk with a medical professional of your choice. As always, my sisters and I at Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver have taken care in selecting the speakers, but the opinions of our speakers are theirs alone. The views and opinions stated in this show are solely those of the contributors and not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted and no part can be reproduced without the express written consent of the Sisterhood of Care, LLC. Thank you for listening to the Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver podcast.